The Christmas wreath was still hanging crooked on the front door when my son's car pulled into the driveway, and I stood at the kitchen window watching it, thinking that was the only honest thing about that whole visit. I had been up since 5 that morning. The turkey was in the oven, the sweet potato casserole, the one my mother taught me, with the brown sugar crust that blisters just right, was cooling on the counter. I had ironed the good tablecloth, the cream linen one I only bring out for Thanksgiving and Christmas. And I had set the table the night before because I knew how the morning would go. I knew I would be running behind, that something would need stirring or adjusting, that no one would offer to help until everything was already done. I am 63 years old. I have been hosting Christmas dinner for this family for 31 years. You would think by now someone might bring a dish, not a store-bought pie in a plastic clamshell, an actual dish, something made at home. But I digress. That's not the story. The story starts with the wreath and the car in the driveway and the feeling I had in my chest that I couldn't quite name yet. Something between hope and dread, the way you feel before a weather front moves in. My son stepped out first. He's 40 now, though I still catch myself thinking of him as the boy who used to hide frogs in his jacket pockets. He looked tired. He always looks tired these days, and I used to worry it was his job or his health, until I understood it was something else entirely. Behind him, my daughter-in-law stepped out in her long camel coat, sunglasses on even though it was December and overcast, already scanning the house like she was appraising it. She kissed my cheek at the door. "Something smells good," she said, which is the nicest thing she's said to me in probably 2 years. I should back up. I should tell you what the last 2 years actually looked like, because without that, none of what happened at that dinner makes sense. My husband passed in the spring of 2021, 38 years of marriage, and then one morning he didn't wake up. Heart attack in his sleep, which the doctors said was peaceful. Though I'm not sure how they would know that. After he died, I was alone in this house for the first time in my adult life. 4 bedrooms, a yard I couldn't keep up with alone, a furnace that made sounds I didn't understand. My son called me the week after the funeral. I remember I was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark because I hadn't thought to turn the lights on, and he said, "Mom, we've been talking and we think you should sell the house." I was 61 years old. I was grieving. I said, "Let me have a little time." He said, "Of course, we just want what's best for you." I believed him. That was my first mistake. Over the next year, I started noticing things. My son would call, but the calls felt shorter, scripted somehow, like he was reading from a list. When I visited them at their house, they live about 40 minutes from me. My daughter-in-law would disappear into the back rooms, and my son would watch television, and I would sit on their couch feeling like a piece of furniture they hadn't decided what to do with yet. When I mentioned my garden, or a book I'd read, or an old friend I'd reconnected with, she would smile in a way that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes and say, "That's nice, Mom," in a tone that meant the opposite. My husband had left me comfortable. Not wealthy, but comfortable. The house was paid off. There was a retirement account that had taken us decades to build. I don't talk about money. My generation doesn't, really. But somehow, my daughter-in-law always seemed to know the details. She had a talent for mentioning things in passing. The house values in my neighborhood. How much assisted living costs these days. Whether I had thought about a trust. I'm not stupid. I want to be clear about that. I am a woman who raised 2 children mostly on her own, while working part-time because my husband traveled for work. I managed a household budget. I balanced a checkbook before most people knew what a spreadsheet was. I am not easily confused, and I am not naive. But grief does something to your radar. It makes you want to believe the people closest to you are on your side, because the alternative, that you are alone in ways you didn't even know yet, is too heavy to carry on top of everything else. So I believed them. When my daughter-in-law suggested I meet with their financial advisor, just to review things, make sure everything's in order, I went. When she mentioned that the house might be a lot to maintain alone, I didn't argue. When she started referring to my bedroom furniture as if she already knew where it might go, I told myself I was being paranoid. My neighbor is the one who woke me up. She's been next door for 20 years, a retired schoolteacher who tends roses with a dedication I have always admired. She came over one afternoon in October with a loaf of zucchini bread, the way she does, and she sat at my kitchen table and she said, Without preamble, "Honey, can I ask you something?" She told me she had run into my son and my daughter-in-law at the hardware store the previous weekend. She said they'd been looking at paint samples. She said my daughter-in-law had said, casually, that they were thinking about updating the place once everything got sorted out. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark, the same dark kitchen in my head, even though I was in my bed, and I went back over every conversation of the past 18 months and let myself see what I had been choosing not to see. The questions about the retirement account, the comments about my health, always framed as concern, always landing like warnings. The way my daughter-in-law photographed the house when she visited, claiming she was sending pictures to her mother, who just loved old craftsman homes. I am not a dramatic woman. I don't enjoy conflict. I was raised to keep the peace, to smooth things over, to find the charitable interpretation. But lying there in the dark, I understood something clearly for the first time. Keeping the peace had cost me 2 years of my life, and it was about to cost me everything else if I didn't stop. I called my own attorney the next morning. My own, not the financial advisor they'd recommended, not anyone connected to them. A woman I'd met years ago through the church auxiliary, who practices estate law and who I had always liked because she looks you in the eye and says the hard thing without flinching. We met twice before Christmas. I'm not going to detail everything we did, because some of it is still private, but I will tell you that when you make decisions from a place of clarity instead of grief, you make better ones. I updated my will. I restructured some accounts. I made sure that the things I wanted to protect were protected, and that certain assumptions my daughter-in-law may have been operating under were no longer accurate. I told no one, not my son, not my neighbor, even though she deserved to know. I kept it to myself, and I set the Christmas table and I waited. Because here is what I have learned in 63 years. You don't always have to win loudly. Sometimes the quietest moves are the ones that last. The dinner itself started the way these things always do. My son carried in a bottle of wine, which my daughter-in-law chose. She has strong opinions about wine and is not shy about sharing them. I had made a pitcher of holiday punch, a cranberry ginger thing with sparkling water that I'd been making for years, and set it on the table alongside the wine. We sat down. I brought out the food and courses the way I like to, not all at once, because I find it more civilized and because it gives you something to do with your hands when the conversation gets awkward. My daughter-in-law complimented the tablecloth. My son said the turkey looked great. Everyone was very well behaved. It was after the first course that I noticed it. I had gotten up to bring in the sweet potato casserole, and when I came back to the table, something was different about my drink. Not dramatically different. I wouldn't have noticed at all except that I had set my glass down in a particular spot, to the right of my salad fork, which I always do. And now it was slightly left of center, and there was a faint cloudiness to the liquid that hadn't been there before. I stood in the kitchen doorway and I looked at my glass. My daughter-in-law was talking about something. A trip they were planning, I think. My son was nodding and reaching for the bread. I am not a suspicious person by nature. I want to emphasize that again. But I had spent 2 months learning to trust what I actually saw, instead of the story I wanted to tell myself about it. And what I saw, standing in that doorway with the casserole dish in my hands, was that someone had done something to my drink while I was in the kitchen. I set the casserole down. I sat. I picked up my glass and held it up to the light, the way my husband used to check wine for sediment. My daughter-in-law paused mid-sentence. "Is something wrong with the punch?" she asked. "Just checking for ice," I said. I put the glass back down. I watched for another 30 seconds, which is a long time to watch something when you're trying to appear like you're not watching. And I made my decision. My daughter-in-law's glass was to my left. Hers was the wine, same deep red. Mine was the punch. Different drinks, different glasses, which made what I was thinking complicated. But then she got up. She excused herself to use the restroom, which she does at least twice at every dinner because she says my downstairs bathroom has good light, whatever that means. And while she was gone, I simply switched her place setting with mine. Not the plates, just the glasses. Her wine where my punch had been, my punch where her wine was. A small thing, a quiet thing. Nobody saw it happen. She came back and sat down and reached for her glass without looking at it. That's how automatic it is, reaching for your own drink. And she drank. I watched my son's face, not hers. That's the thing about watching for guilt. You learn to look sideways. He glanced at her glass. He glanced at mine. Something moved across his expression that I cannot fully describe. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was more like the look of a man calculating something and finding the numbers have changed. He looked up and met my eyes, and I held his gaze very calmly, the way I used to when he was small and had done something he knew I knew about. I said, "The sweet potato casserole turned out nicely, I think." We finished dinner. About 40 minutes later, my daughter-in-law said she had a headache. She said it came on suddenly. My son was very attentive, getting her water, suggesting they leave early, putting his hand on her back. She did look pale, actually. She looked the way you look when something has made you suddenly, unexpectedly tired. They left before dessert. My son hugged me at the door, a longer hug than usual, and I felt him hold on for a moment, like he wanted to say something. He didn't say it. He just looked at me for a second with those tired eyes, and then looked away. I stood on the porch and watched their car back out of the driveway. The wreath swayed a little in the wind. I went inside and ate a slice of the pecan pie I'd made, which was very good, and I washed the dishes, and I did not feel triumphant the way I might have expected. I felt clear, just clear. That was 6 months ago. Things have changed, though not in the dramatic ways you might imagine. My daughter-in-law did not confess to anything. My son did not call me the next day with an apology. Life does not arrange itself into clean scenes the way a movie does. What happened is quieter than that, and in some ways more satisfying. About 3 weeks after Christmas, my son came to see me alone. He came in the afternoon on a Tuesday, which was unusual, and he sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I've had every difficult conversation of my adult life, and he looked tired in a different way than he used to. Tired like someone who has been doing a lot of thinking in the middle of the night. He said, "Mom, I want to ask you something." I poured him coffee. I sat down. I waited. He said, "Are you happy here? In this house?" I said, "Yes." He looked at the table. He said, "I'm sorry if I made you feel like you weren't secure, like things weren't yours." I didn't tell him what I knew, or what I'd seen, or what I'd done. There was no point. The accounts were restructured. The will was updated. The house was mine in ways it had always been mine, but now could not be disputed. What I had needed to protect was protected. What he was apologizing for, whether he understood its full shape or not, was real, and I accepted the apology because he is my son, and I have loved him for 40 years, and love does not require a full accounting. I said, "I know you love me," he said. "I do." I said, "Then let's figure out how to do this better." We talked for 2 hours that afternoon, about what I actually needed, which was not financial management but connection. About what was hard for him, which was more than I realized. About his marriage, carefully, the way you talk around something large that is in the center of the room. He didn't say anything directly about his wife. I didn't ask him to. But I noticed, in the months that followed, certain things. My daughter-in-law stopped asking about the financial advisor. She stopped mentioning the house values in the neighborhood. She was polite when we saw each other. She has always been polite, in the technical sense, but there was something different in how she held herself around me. Not the cool confidence she used to have. Something slightly more careful. Maybe she doesn't know what I know. Maybe she suspects I know more than I've said. I have no interest in enlightening her either way. What I do know is this. I spent 2 years smaller than I needed to be. Quieter, more accommodating, more grateful for crumbs of attention than a woman my age with my history should ever have to be. I was so afraid of being alone that I made myself easy to take advantage of. And I did it in the name of keeping the peace and not making things difficult, and being a good mother-in-law, and 100 other performances that left me standing in my own kitchen at Christmas, looking at a glass I wasn't sure was safe to drink. That is not happening again. My neighbor came over in April with the first roses of the season, just a few stems from the climber on her fence, and she set them in a jar on my kitchen windowsill and sat down and said, "You seem different." I said, "Different how?" She thought about it. She said, "Steadier." I like that. I have been thinking about it since. Steadier. Not harder, not colder, not bitter in the way that grief can curdle into if you're not careful. Just steadier. Like a table that has had its legs properly checked. I'm still in this house. I still host Christmas, though I've started letting people know in advance what they might bring, and not just store-bought pie. The sweet potato casserole is still mine and always will be. My husband's chair is still at the head of the table. I still iron the cream linen tablecloth, but I do it at my own pace now, without the low-grade anxiety of needing everything to be perfect so that no one could find fault with me. That need to be faultless. That's what they count on, I think. When you're always trying to earn your place, you stop noticing when someone is quietly removing the ground beneath your feet. I notice now. That's the thing I want you to hear, if you're sitting somewhere reading this and recognizing something in it. I notice now. Not because I became suspicious of everyone, or because I stopped loving my family, or because I built walls around myself the way grief sometimes makes you want to. I noticed because I decided that my own instincts deserved the same respect I had been extending to everyone else for 30 years. Because that woman standing in the doorway holding the casserole dish, looking at a glass that didn't quite look right. She wasn't being dramatic, she was paying attention. And the very least I can do, for her and for everything she's built, is to keep paying attention for whatever comes next. This is my house. This is my life. This is mine. No one else gets to decide when it's over.